So there are two periods they're going to deal with. One is the Ezra, Nehemiah, Daniel, and Esther period, and the second is the time of the Gemara, when it's Bava and Yerushalmi. We're going to deal with kind of two theories, one for each period, and so the other qualifier is to just say that each of these is a kind of probably, the idea of studying the diaspora politics in the time of Ezra, Nehemiah, Daniel, and Esther is, at least a course, and I'm not the Tanakh scholar, and we're going to do it in half of one class. So what's the justification of that? It's at least enough to be able to raise kind of a way of thinking about it, what the issues are that revolve around that. And most significantly, I'm going to be sharing with you, was formulated very beautifully by Aaron Kohler, who's now professor at Yeshiva University. He's in Israel for the year. His wife's taught here for a bunch of years, who wrote a book a couple of years ago on Esther and its reception. And there are funny things about Esther, that we all know when we think about the book. Like, it doesn't have God's name in it, and we have to explain why that is. And there's no midrashic, and there's a Masechet of Megillah that if you go through the Gemara, it kind of goes through Megillat Esther from the beginning to the end, explaining what each of the things means, what each of the things means, what each of the things means, in a very unusual kind of way. And Aaron Kohler, on the heels of a lot of research that was done before, said there's something going on in Esther in terms of the way that it was received and where we stand now that makes it feel like some of its meaning has been kind of covered over because there was a motivation to kind of cover it over. So he did some work to kind of sort out Esther's initial reception when it was first written, and arguing, kind of show that they didn't like Esther so much. They didn't like Esther so much, and then came to salvage it in a certain kind of way. So there is a kind of a complex of what was being fought about or argued about between Ezra, Nehemiah, Daniel, Esther as Sfarim, and when they became canonized, they all become canonized in a part of those who have written about canonization point to the way that canonization kind of neutralizes differences. It's like everything's in the same canon, so it's like, it's one Torah, and everything's kind of more or less, going to agree, and the different voices kind of get quashed a little bit. And sometimes what scholars like to do is try to figure out, okay, what were those voices actually saying before they all got kind of blended together in this canon. So the argument here is that Ezra and Nehemiah is a particular point of view, and Daniel is a particular point of view, and Esther is a particular point of view. That, again, I'm just sharing with you initial thoughts, and to that degree it's unfair, right, in that I'm totally biasing the argument because I'm only selecting a part and putting it to you, but I think it's actually a really interesting thing, and at least I'm telling you that I'm doing it, so that's So Ezra Nehemiah is kind of covers a period from the beginning of it's covering the kingdoms of Cyrus and Darius when Jews under Persian rule get after Nebuchadnezzar, after Persia basically starts to take over from Bavel, from Nebuchadnezzar, and then starts to spread their rule further. So there's an interest in the Persian government of allowing different religions to be able to live their lives the way that they want to live their lives, and therefore support for the building of the Beit HaMikdash. There was a very strong belief, as described in the Nevi'im, that at the time of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, it caused a tremendous amount of theological chaos. On the one hand, it's like, is this the end of the Jewish people? God said that we're going to be destroyed, but God also promised that we're going to be able to come back. So how do you manage all of those, and what does it mean? Are we really going to be able to come back? And so that was kind of the issue of the day. And so if we are going to kind of read through these, some of these segments. So he says, the returnees of Ezra's time also saw God's hand in the actions of the Persian kings. Even the law of the Torah was now authorized by the king, and its legitimacy now derived from its being sanctioned by the imperial powers. Ezra and Nehemiah represent Persian imperial law and Judean law under Persian domination as collaborations among the king, God, and Jewish agents. So there's actually an interesting thing about, first of all, when you think about Ezra and Nehemiah in terms of the issue that we were discussing, so you have Jews who were living in Persia who, one after the other, decided that they're going to try to bring people back to Israel. Ezra is kind of a restoration, bringing people back, and then also championing the study of Torah and saying that you have to leave the intermarried people have to leave their non-Jewish spouses, kind of a rejuvenation, and they're coming to Israel to settle there. And then Nehemiah is also a high up in the Persian government and is given the power to govern over Yehud, as it's called, right, the Jewish domain. And so there's an interesting kind of thing. First of all, in what ways is that set up different and similar to, there's a return to Israel on the heels of the destruction of the temple. And so there's a community of people who go there. So kind of, I don't know, either based on what you know or what you kind of imagine. How's the setup kind of compared to, think about like what happened in 1948, think about it now. Like, is it sovereignty? Like, were most people there? Well, what are kind of our assumptions of what that time looked like?
Israel depended on a strong diaspora community.
So, I mean, it's for sure like the people who came were diaspora Jews. They were diaspora, and they depended on a strong diaspora community that was also, not only in terms of the Jews in the diaspora, but actually also, well, this is a question of sovereignty. Is that an example, is there Jewish sovereignty in that setting?
Not really.
Under the approval of the Persian.
Right. Well, you can say, yeah. I guess I would say that you could say yes and no, depending on how you look at it. In a certain sense, yes, because who's ruling over that territory are, Jews have the right to rule over Yerushalayim and territory. Nehemiah is sent by the Persian government to rule over that territory. So it's a Jewish rule. It's a Jewish rule under Persian rule. It's certainly not sovereignty, autonomous. It is a governorship, right?
Like
type of structure.
state.
It's a vassal state, right?
Yeah.
Those all the right that type of setting. And so what you have though in that time, interestingly, and then in terms of numbers, kind of the sense of the
Very
numbers.
small percentage.
Small group of people go to Israel, and most of the people are living outside of Israel. And so the people who moved to, and actually there are different kinds of population. When they were exiled initially, so there was a remnant of Jews who were left in Israel, and now there's a new group of people who are moving to Israel, and there's a much larger group of people who are still settled outside of Israel. So you've got kind of circles in Israel, because Ezra and his community, they see themselves as the real settlers. They are the Jews who were left there from before. There are the Jews who are still in diaspora, and we can imagine that then there's imagine yourself a Jew in Israel at the time, and imagine yourself a Jew in Persia at the time. What are you thinking in terms of where we're supposed to, where are you supposed to be? Is this kind of the rebuilding that God had in mind when he said that we were going to destroy the Beit HaMikdash and we were going to come back? So is Ezra's return the real return, or is not the real return? Like, how am I supposed to know that whether this is or not? And you start to think about it in those terms, like, wow, that's like a very familiar set of questions.
It's like the early waves of Zionism.
Yeah, it's like, well, it's not, well, it's stronger than the early waves of Zionism, at least the moment that we're starting, because at least part of it, Daniel is probably maybe a little bit even earlier than that, but when there's a real presence, like by Ezra's time, yeah, I mean, I don't want to draw the analogy too precisely. You have to do more work to do that, right? But at a certain point, it's even after, there's an establishment of a state. Like here, in 1948, there was a fledgling state. There were more Jews who were living outside of Israel. There was a certain kind of dependence. There's certainly a question of where we're supposed to be. So something within those 100 years feels a little, and I'm not doing this in order to like draw a direct analogy. Let's see what happened there and then. But I do find it, frankly, just fascinating. Welcome to school.
Is there any concept of numbers, volume?
Very small numbers who went to Israel. I mean, Ezra does include numbers, and they're hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. So it's a few thousands of people who are there. But by far the majority is staying outside. And then Nehemiah, there's kind of another, well, it's kind of, again, a debate exactly. Really getting into it is kind of getting into the debate of, and I'm just sidestepping it for now, it's like what the relationship is between Ezra and Nehemiah and how exactly those years play in. So, I feel like as an educator and not a Bible educator, and that's not a Tanakh professor, I feel like still we should learn these texts and get a sense of, okay, but there's something there that's actually you can draw a real meaning on. The circumstances are not dissimilar. What I think is particularly fascinating is what you then find when you read this form of Tanakh is that there is strong analogy between the different reactions that you find amongst those groups of people and the reactions that you find here. And Aaron Kohler, and it's not just Aaron Kohler's argument, is that Ezra Nehemiah is an argument, and Daniel is an argument, and Esther is a different argument in terms of this question. What I'd like to do is kind of read a little bit about how that plays out. So he goes, so the Ezra Nehemiah, the statement in quotation marks says, if you think about the kind of theological significance, the interpretation they're putting forward here, Ezra and Nehemiah represent Persian imperial law and Judean law under Persian domination as collaborations among the king, God, and Jewish agents. That basically means that in times of Ezra and Nehemiah, they were thinking, it's like Rav Kook-like almost. It's like the whoever it is are agents of God. So Cyrus, Koresh, and Daryavish are agents of God, and Ezra and Nehemiah are agents of God. The people who are going, this is all part of the plan. The opening chapters of the book of Ezra may be read as making just this claim. Those returning with Ezra were supported by God and king. To put it differently, they were supported by the king, who was in turn supported by God. This ideology matched the Persian claims. The Persian kings claimed divine support for their actions as well. So there was like a great, likeness of mind between the Persian kings who saw themselves as being charged with divine, doing God's will, and the Jewish authorities to see themselves as doing God's will. Unfortunately, in this instance, the two people who were doing God's will had the same thing in mind, and so they were able to allow the Jews to be able to grow. Ezra and Nehemiah both argued hard for the centrality of Jerusalem. This is not so much an argument about reality as an argument for ideology. Jerusalem should be the center of the Jewish world. In reality, Jerusalem was unimpressive in the Persian period, and the rhetoric of centrality was all the more necessary to compensate. Here he's trying to kind of talk to, and again, very interesting to read, Ezra and Nehemiah with that in mind, the kind of push to say, we got to go, this is it. Ezra and Nehemiah Ezra starts to travel, Yud Bet Nisan, crossing into Eretz Yisrael with his group, so the association with, and both there's a language and a date with Yetziat Mitzrayim and entering into Eretz Yisrael is very strong, and so that's kind of a mode of thinking. So I want to put forward Ezra and Nehemiah as a particular approach to that period of history and how to understand how their self-understanding of what was happening for them at that period of time. Any questions on that?
Is that a novel notion? I understand.
Which part?
The notion that there's Eretz Yisrael, but then there's this sort of centrality of Yerushalayim. Obviously the Beit HaMikdash was there, so it was central in that way. But in other words, the notion that we all had to live there, as opposed to living in other parts of Eretz Yisrael, is that?
I think that because of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, the idea of returning to for Ezra, the Beit HaMikdash had already been the fact that it's about the return is that Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, you got to return there, so that makes Yerushalayim the center. That being said, there is a difference between the Beit HaMikdash actually being built, which already happens in the time of Zerubbabel, but then kind of limping along, and Ezra trying to create not the building of the Beit HaMikdash, but the spiritual rebirth of the Jewish people, and then Nehemiah, whose mission was to build a wall around Yerushalayim, which is interpreted by the people around him as a claim of independence, trying to say so those are all parts of the same story that span, 100 years, but it's different elements to it. The return to the temple, the return of Jewish life, the return of building a wall as a sign of sovereignty. So it's all part of a picture. And if we were really learning Ezra and Nehemiah, right, part of the issue would be which of these, how do all these issues interact? What's Ezra and Nehemiah as a unit really all about? So if you put all of it together, it's kind of It's more than the temple. It's more than the rebirth of Judaism. It's like a rebirth of a people, and that's what the Sfarim of Ezra and Nehemiah are about. And there are, I hope that you can take it as right. I imagine how you can kind of dig into that way more. Still, in terms of as a kind of a survey of a sefer, that's the argument that the sefer is trying to make. We're returning now. These are the people who believe that this is the return. That's what's happening. That's number one. Some of the Jews in the diaspora, the third paragraph, however, reacted negatively to some of the tenets of Ezra's platform. While he aimed to strengthen Jewishness by utilizing Persian power and seemed to see political authority as merely a way of achieving religious goals, others argued that simply being a loyal Jew without political involvement was the best way to achieve political success in Persian terms. These people told stories about Jews who had bravely stood up to the authorities and had even narrowly escaped death as the price for their insurrection. According to the stories, God would protect those who remained loyal to their religion at all costs. Characters such as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah were said to have survived harrowing experiences in order to prove their faithfulness. These stories claimed that if one were loyal as a Jew, worldly success would follow. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were all appointed to high-ranking positions of governance. In some, these stories aimed for a complex message, a corrective to the simplistic position asserted by Ezra. Being a Persian and being a Jew are both valuable. These stories are not sanguine, as I'm supposed to say, about retaining dual loyalties. When these values conflict, the choice must be clear. The first and foremost loyalty must be to one's Jewish identity. What's different about this position than the first position?
Sort of throwing off the duality of identity between being Persian and Jewish here. Judaism.
So what does it mean to be a good Jew?
They emphasize being Persian.
Well, you can be a Persian and be a Jew, and by showing your commitment, Judaism comes first. But Jews are going to be most successful at this point by figuring out how to be successful in Persia. And in being Moshe Nefesh for what it is to be a Jew in Persia. That has to be your first commitment, but that we're going to do best if we are successful in that kind of way. So the names that we're quoting here are Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And I just, again, in the same spirit of a little bit of a kind of a taste of a position without going through the Sefer, if you can turn to page 2. So I copied, I just gave you the first parak of Sefer Daniel. So, and I'm going to read through the first parak, and again in a survey kind of way, and so you can get kind of the flavor of it and see how this position actually is a position different than Ezra and Nehemiah in the context of this set of questions that's being proposed. So Perek Aleph starts as follows: Bishnat Shalosh Malchut Yehoyakim Melech Yehuda, Ba Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel Yushalayim Vayatzar Aleha. And so it starts with Nebuchadnezzar taking siege of the city. Vaytein Adonai biyadot Yehoyakim Melech Yehuda u'miktzat klei Beit Elokim. This is starting with Nebuchadnezzar destroying the Beit HaMikdash and taking the Kelim of the Beit HaMikdash with him back to Bavel. Vayomer Melech la'ashpenaz Rav Sarisav lehavim ibnei Yisrael mizar hamlucha min apartimim yiladim asher ein bahem kol mum v'tovei mareh u'maskilim kol chachma v'yodei da'at mevinei mada. Nebuchadnezzar asks to get all the best people, good-looking, intelligent, smart people, so that he can train them to be for him. He basically establishes like a train, West Point. For people, it's not military though. I mean, it's that this is kind of diplomacy or whatever, governance. What would you call it?
Kennedy School.
The Kennedy School.
College
Yes, thank you.
exchange.
Harvard, right. Mi pat bag hamelech. Pat bag is the kind of bread that they served. He gave them food. Umiyein mishtav. It was room and board to go to school. Ulgadlam shanim shalosh umikzatam yamdu lefnei hamelech. It's a 3-year program. You get room and board. And the best ones are the ones who are going to serve whom? It's striking when you say it. Who are they going to serve? Nebuchadnezzar. Holy cow. Vayhi bahem ibnei Yehuda, Daniel, Hanani, Mishael, Azariah. So the Jews in the program were, I would tell you, like, if you read it with a certain mindset, it's like the Kennedy School, right? Even think like that, right? They got, it's 1940, whatever, and you got four Jews got into Harvard, right? And they're Vayasem lehem Sarah Sarisim Shemot, and you have to change their names, obviously. You can't be Daniel, Hanan, Mishael, Azariah. So Daniel is Belshazzar, and Hananiah is Shadrach, and Mishael is Meshach, and Azariah is Abednego, so that they can blend in. So first of all, they're there. They're willing to go. They're going to the program, right? Daniel's going to the program, and their names are changed and functioning. But pasuk chet, Vayasem Daniel alibo, asher lo yitka'al b'patbag hamelach v'yein mishtav. But Daniel says, I'm not eating. It's actually interesting. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah focuses on these psukim. What doesn't he want to eat? He doesn't want their pat bag. He doesn't want to eat their bread. He doesn't drink their wine. He doesn't eat their bread and drink their wine. Meaning, I'm not talking about. The Gemara actually says that. We're not talking about tarfus, right? It's not. I don't want to eat your shchita. He's saying I don't want to eat your bread. So this Gemara in Avodah Zarah that talks about bishul akum and pas akum. So Rav actually interprets these psukim. So it's, again, when you're reading the Gemara and you're not paying, it's like the Gemara says the pasuk that says whatever, but it's actually when you read the psukim, it's like, wow, this is, I get it. It's like this is Daniel who's in Nebuchadnezzar's university. He's going there and saying, I'm not eating his food.
You have
So-
maybe a
But
fruit
is it-
plate?
But is it
Listen.
really more like I'm not going to be beholden to you?
Well, let's see. Let's go a little further. That means to be
I'll take a handout.
Yitgael means to be defiled, gross, like that. Vayasib Daniel al libo shalik al pat ba'amach b'mishtav vayvakesh sarizim shelo yitgael. Vayten Elokim et Daniel chesed l'rach l'fnei Sarah Sarisim. Does that trigger something for you?
Yes.
That's Yosef, yeah, 100%. And anything else? Esther.
A
So
lot of echoes of Esther.
there are tons of divrei Torah about Yosef and Esther, and there's echoes of Esther in here. It just reinforces the point that there is this. It's the same.
Yishimini, they're from
Yishim-
Rachel's line,
Very
not from
great.
Yehuda's.
All that is great. Right, 100%. That's that. They want you to make those associations. And what's common about their narratives? Yosef's the first Jew who is Egyptian, whatever, and then Esther is that, and Daniel. That's totally what's happening. Yes, sorry.
So after Pat Bag, the Yain Mishtab, that refers to wine. That he
Yes.
didn't want to drink the wine either.
Yes.
Right? So we're talking about not eating bread, perhaps that there was no, what do you call it, the lot of bread, when you take the.
Like Trumas and not like that?
that.
You don't know. They are not obligated in that. It's Chutz La'aretz. It's not Jewish. There's no obligation. There's no. When Rav actually interprets these psukim, the severe interpretation in the Gemara that we don't paskin like is that bishul akum applies to any food processed by non-Jews, and the Gemara ends up rejecting that option and saying no, it's stuff that's cooked by non-Jews, and if it's Ola Shulchan Melachim, then if there are all kinds of kulas about how to get around it. But strictly speaking, Rav actually, the severe position, it's Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, I think in the Tanaim, if I remember correctly, is takes a severe position. He says from Daniel you learn that you can't eat food that's processed by a non-Jew. Now, can you imagine, first of all, both sides of it? What would life be like if you couldn't eat food processed by a non-Jew? What would be the rationale behind somebody saying that you can't eat food processed by a non-Jew? So take yourself out. For the first question, imagine it now, and it'd be like, well, life would be dramatically different, right? But so it's obviously we naturally push against that idea. But in terms of creating a separation between Jews and non-Jews, that's going to create the separation. And you can see off of this when you learn the Gemaras in Avodah Zarah, the laws of Bishul Akum and the different opinions around it as being real wrestling with its kind of markers, and that's the beauty of Gemara debate and halacha, when you actually see it not as, there's halacha, I got to do it. And you go through the sugi, you see that the way the different lines are drawn and the different interpretations of the psukim and are all, like, we get the values here. How do you draw the lines so you can achieve kind of integration and separation at the same time? Daniel's pretty severe. He says, I don't want to eat the meat, I don't want to eat the bread, I don't want to drink the wine. Okay, so the Saras Sarisim finds favor. Vayomer Saras Sarisim Daniel, Yarei ani es Adoni HaMelech asher minat ma'achalchem et mishtechem asher lama yireh pnechem zoafim min ha'yoladim asher kigilchem v'chiyavtem et roshi l'melech. So the Saras Sarisim says to Daniel, you're a great guy, I'm afraid of the king. If you're emaciated, everybody else is doing great, it's my head. So I really don't want that to happen. Vayomer Daniel, turn the page, El HaMeltzar, so he turns to the Meltzar that the Saras Sarisim appointed, and he says, Nasna et avodecha yamim asara v'itnu lana min hazeroim v'nochla mayim v'nishteh. So what does he ask for? He says, the Saras Sarisim likes me, but it's too dangerous for him. So he goes to the kitchen, goes to the kitchen, and he says, do me a favor, I don't want to eat any of this stuff. If you can just give me zeroim, seeds and mayim. I want seeds and water. Just 10 days. And you see like how I do on eating this for 10 days. So he said, okay, I'll try it for 10 days. Of course, right? They're living on seeds and water, and they look better than everybody else does. So the Meltzar would then pocket the bread and the wine, and would give them the seeds and the water. These four kids, the four kids are Daniel, Hanani, Mishael, Azariah, right? Remember, right? That's like the lion's den and being thrown into that later in Daniel. They're most enough for that. Natan lehem Elohim Mada, Haskel, B'chol Sefer, V'chachmav, Daniel, Edim, B'kol Chazon, V'chalamot. Chaim Mishav Azariah very wise, and Daniel has an added ability, which is he is able to interpret dreams. If you read later on in Sefer Daniel, you find that the parallels are clear to Yosef. It's even better. He does one better. He's able to, the king doesn't remember his dream, so Daniel's able to remember the dream and then interpret the dream afterwards. And then he's like a hero for being able to do it. It's like so, again, I like you read it and you read like people interpreting and saying it's so clear that it's, it's kind of doing Yosef one better, right? That's kind of what's happening. Again, right? You're remembering again. This is Nebuchadnezzar we're talking about. Right? Aren't you asking yourself? I mean, it's like, we're all trained, I think. Lahavdil and Allah, and how it's like Nebuchadnezzar. There's like Nebuchadnezzar and Haman and Hitler and this is Daniel Hanani Mishael Azariah working for Nebuchadnezzar, which says something about what the right. Without knowing what it says something about the position of these Jews and Nebuchadnezzar and their relationships in that kind of setting. They were better than everybody else, and Daniel served until the kingdom, the Melucha of Koresh. That's Perek Aleph Daniel. What's the position of Daniel as a religious, as a sefer? So the argument is that Daniel is trying to tell a different story than Ezra and Nehemiah. If you just position them next to each other, they tell two different stories. Ezra and Nehemiah is telling the story of you got to move to Israel, and Daniel is telling the story of you got to be like the firmest Jew that you can be. We're going to be most successful if we're here, and you can rise to the heights of government, but being Shomer Shabbos, even if you risk getting fired, that's like the most important thing. And in fact, they were tremendously successful. So the last paragraph back on page 1 goes, sometimes the question is put explicitly. Who was the better Jew? Was it the Jew who stayed in Shushan to advocate on behalf of his people, working behind the scenes to ensure that the Jews throughout the empire could enjoy the freedoms and rights they took for granted? Or was it the Jew who trekked back to Jerusalem, sacrificing the luxuries of a court life, of hardship, of life in the Western province, for getting his hands dirty with the work of rebuilding the Jewish community around Jerusalem? You get that?
Totally right, isn't it?
What?
It's totally, the total
It's,
echo of Zionism.
it's replaying the same thing, right? Again, I mean, it's like amazing. There are differences, right? Again, I don't want to overstate the way in which it's not the same, meaning different in a million ways. But in terms of what it means to be a Jew, it's dramatic. Now, all of this is for Aaron Kohler is this is the stuff that is rooted in other scholars. Before he gets to kind of the argument that he wants to make. So meaning this is, kind of well argued by Tanakh commentaries. So what's Esther? So he says like this. He writes actually to people. There's kind of a 2-page little part where he says, I'm going to try to explain to you what Esther is by making up a kind of a makeup. He creates a fictional character who he names Marduka. Marduka is Mordechai, and Marduka is a very strong Babylonian god, Babylonian name. And so what's Marduka thinking? So Marduka says, I get Ezra Nehemiah and I get Daniel. You know what? I'm not sure. I see the whole thing like differently. He says, it was thus maddening for Marduka and other Jews in the Eastern Diaspora to learn that back in the West, the Jews in Jerusalem were claiming the Hebrew language as their exclusive inheritance. This was symptomatic, Marduka felt, of a larger trend. Those over in Yehud had been arrogating the position of legitimate Jews to themselves, but this was something that Marduka started to contest at every turn. His choice of language excited him because the use of Hebrew allowed one to assert one's Jewishness simply by speaking. And before I read the last paragraph, I don't know if this is like set up well enough or not, but if you have this in mind and kind of clear your head of everything that you learned about Megillas Esther based on the Midrashim and try to kind of imagine Megillas Esther on its own, that might be a tall order. Like what are the glaring factors of about Megillas Esther that kind of stand out? So you mentioned like God doesn't appear in the book. That's like a significant thing. Like once you think along those lines, does anything else kind of come to?
Intermarriage?
Is intermarriage? Imagine Ezra Nehemiah writing a book about the Jewish queen intermarrying with the king. He would slam it big time. Is there any criticism of the intermarriage there's questions in the Gemara. Gemara says, what do you mean? Esther, how can Esther do that? It's like Yarg Valyavor, how could she do it? Is there any criticism of that in the book? Nothing.
No.
Anything else? Lahavdil. Yeah.
He's approving.
Well, who's Mordechai? Meaning Mordechai is kind of a court Jew. Certainly sounds Daniel Chanam Mishael Azariah like.
So Mordechai's role is to rescue world Jewry at that time. Hodavat Kush. This was a decree that affected not just Persia or one province. It was 127 provinces.
The Jewish people, for sure, are not the Jewish people in Yerushalayim. The Jewish people in this story are across the board. I think what's striking, as I was going to say, the next thing is, in order to strengthen that point, is Esther is the only book that has there's no Eretz Yisrael anything in the book of Esther. There's nothing about Eretz Yisrael in the book of Esther. Actually,
the story of Esther that totally assimilated, and it seems perfectly right.
Al-Pi, the pshat of the Sefer, that's totally what it reads like. So the theory is that the book of Esther, and again, as I keep saying, right, there's a lot more support, work, arguing with in terms of the theory of the thing. But I'm going to kind of suffice it for now to say that the argument is a fascinating argument to say that, and coupled with the fact that the kind of the reception history of Esther, which is what Aaron Kohler spent his time on. I mean, that's like the effort. As I keep saying, there's a lot of stuff that like seeing how it was not, people didn't love that sefer. So you can, what's actually being posited is three, now you look at Ezra, Nehemiah, and Daniel, and Esther, and you have like three ways to think about what it means in a time of an exile with return to Israel, about how to consider that. With Ezra and Nehemiah being it's like to unfairly do the comparison, right? So it's like the Zionists are Ezra and Nehemiah, and the kind of Haredi yeshivish community is Daniel, and the kind of the German reform, you want to say, I don't know, whatever. Again, apologies. It's that is kind of a group of people in America saying like, we're in America. It's like you got to figure out how, and we're strong, and actually we're saving the Jewish people around the world in this kind of way. No land, with no land of their own, even, right? I mean, and on the contrary, maybe. So that's like, the goal here was to just say, like, the question about Israel and diaspora, if you read the Sfarim Tanakh in that kind of way, it's like a remarkable comparison. Now, what's the right way to teach? It actually explains tons of things about Esther. So many things that the Gemara explains and re-explains in terms, again, how Esther can do it, and how could the Jews go to the Mishteh, and it was a separate party, it wasn't the same party, there are a lot, the reason why daf, yud to yud, there's 7 daf in Megillah that are go pasuk by pasuk. If you would ask somebody, say like, what is the portion of Tanakh that has the most concurrent from beginning to end, start at a certain daf, and it just goes kind of explaining the sefer straight up. Esther is the biggest one in terms of kind of running it through. Why? Because it had to be saved. It had to be interpreted so that it was going to be able to work. And that is kind of a fascinating argument. I'm just going to read the last paragraph and then you can comment. It says, in formulating his ideology, it seemed to Marduka that the ideology against which he was railing was in fact a composite. Here he's positioning it specifically not against the Daniel one mostly, but against the Israel, Zionist, Ezra Nehemiah argument. There was a linguistic component. The view that Hebrew was Lashon HaKodesh. That means that it's an interesting thing when you set it up this way. Ezra pushed Hebrew, and he pushed the reading of the Torah, and that was like a very important thing. It is interesting that Ezra is written in 2 languages. There is lots of Aramaic, and there's Hebrew. And Daniel, there is lots of Aramaic and some Hebrew. And Esther, if you argued this, is written in Hebrew. The idea, by the way, I'll just say that Shushan HaBira, there's only another city that's a Bira, and that is in Tanakh, and that's Yerushalayim, which is the Bira. And the idea of the whole thing of, which is a weird thing in Megillah about walled cities and when they celebrate Purim, what does that have to do with anything? And I'm sure that when you hear that, we say, like, you scratch your head and you say, how did this happen? Like, since when does the walled city have to do with anything? And why is it Yericha? It's the it's Yerushalayim, right? It's like, the Yerushalayim Delita, right? So it's the Yerushalayim de Persia. It's all, right? It's like, all familiar stuff. And the argument is that in writing the Sefer, he wants to write it in Hebrew, he wants Yerushalayim Habira. There are things, he's kind of making that argument. There's a geographic component, the view that Jewish life should be centered in Jerusalem. This is all Ezra and Nehemiah. There's an ethnic component, the view that the leaders of the Jews even now ought to be from the house of David, whereas, as you said, where are the leaders of Esther from? Binyamin, right? He's not from the house of David. There was a genealogical component, the view that Jews had to be pure-blooded and separate themselves from their neighbors, not in Esther. There was a historiographical component, view that the ideal future would be the mass return of all Jews to Israel. There was a political component, the view that the Persian bureaucracy was acting out of God's will on the earth. And so he undertook to dismantle this complex. What he calls, Kohler calls it the Hebrew, Jerusalem, endogamy, Exodus, God complex, one element at a time. The king is a fool, the center is Jerusalem, the Jews are assimilated. I'm writing the book in Hebrew. And so what you have between these 3 Sfarim is a very familiar kind of debate about how to manage the question of Israel and diaspora. That was the first example. Comments or questions on that? Yeah.
So we have this big day of revelry when Easter wins, and we don't in any way celebrate like Daniel getting out of the lion's den.
Is it? What do you think? Do you have a thought about that?
No, just the fact that we celebrate Esther kind of legitimizes it, or lends it some validity, it seems to me.
I'm not. I don't know. It's what's for sure true is that looking at the days of celebration, and had they also what were the days of celebration? I mean, even that is worthy of discussion. I mean, it's not a Mikra Kodesh, It doesn't sound like it's like Halav Hodah. Doesn't sound like, first of all, it's not killing. And then they establish it as Mishteh, and the same way they established the Mishteh. Kayamim Asher Nachu is actually the term they use in the Megillah. Like, it's like the day of rest, you rest, like, it's kind of sounds like Memorial Day, almost. So, like, how they celebrated relates to that issue. Why is it Daniel doesn't merit is an interesting question. I don't know. I'm going to think about what the significance of that is. So again, putting this back into this is kind of a thing about Israel diaspora relations today. I guess the question that I have. I'm not going back to talk about Israel diaspora relations today, but I want to reference it to today in the sense that I kind of ask myself, I don't know, what is it good for people to think about? We don't learn Ezra and Nehemiah much here. People don't learn Daniel a lot at all, and we learn Esther in a totally different way. So it's interesting to me. It would be good or not, I ask myself an educational kind of question. Should we learn these far and learn them that way so people can understand, these debates have existed before. They're very relevant, actually. And which ones do you think won the day at the end of the day? Like, did Judaism survive? Are you living now because the Esther argument was the one that won? Are you living now because the Daniel argument is the one that won? Because the Ezra and Nehemiah argument? Well, it's like it suggests interesting kinds of issues to study our own texts to shed light on the things that we're struggling with now. So that's that. Now I'm a little worried about this gear shift. We're going to have to kind of shift to something totally different. I kind of feel like, and it's 12:45, so okay. Doesn't work so well. Okay. So the Gemara also has its own struggle, and it comes in the context of a very famous citation in the Gemara in Tubot. So we're now shifting 600-700 years, and at this point there is already a super strong center in Bavel and a weakening center in Eretz Yisrael at the time of the end of the editing of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi in 220, and into the end of the 3rd century into the 4th, where there's kind of really a shift. There is certainly again a Talmud Yerushalmi. The Bavel community is growing and gaining strength with more yeshivas opening and all of that. Now there is a Shir Shirim, as we know thanks to Rabbi Soloveitchik, who wrote Kol Dodi Dofek as a commentary basically on Shir Shirim, which is Al Pi Pshat, maybe one thing, but certainly as we understand it, a description of the relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and some Rishonim, a relationship between God and the Jewish people. There is a famous drasha that stems from a pasuk in Shir Shirim that is oddly enough repeated almost verbatim twice and almost very similarly a third time, and that is on page 3 in the middle. So what I want to do is actually get to the sugya that deals with this, but before getting to the sugya that deals with this, I'm going to learn the text itself. So there's a pasuk in Shir Shirim that says, Hishbati etchem b'not Yerushalayim. I have taken an oath, meaning there's a kind of a common oath between us, the daughters of Yerushalayim, b'tzvaot o b'ayalot hasadeh. Tzvaot is the plural of tzvi, and ayalot hasadeh is ayil, like a ram. I'm taking an oath on the kind of animals of the field. Im ta'iru, lest you awaken. Im ta'oraru, kind of a synonym for awaken. Et ha'ava ad shetechbatz. saying that you should commit to this oath not to awaken the love until it is techpatz, until it is desired. Which means what? So the rabbis understood that to mean that, and if we kind of think back to Ezra and Nehemiah, right, in terms of this issue, it's you're going to be in exile, and you're going to stay there and not awaken, not do anything to change that until you know that it's time to change that. And that is an oath that God took, right? And then Perek Gimel says exactly the same pasuk. And it's weird, actually. The same exact pasuk twice, and then third time similarly. From here we derive the famous anti-Zionist text used as an anti-Zionist text of the three oaths, Shalosh Shvot. So it's quoted in Shir Shirim Rabbah before it's differently than it's quoted in the Gemara. I'll read that first. Rabbi Yosef Achanina Amar Shtei Shvot Yesh Kan. There are two oaths. Why does he say two oaths?
It's two are identical.
Presumably because, you see that he, in his version, is focusing on the two identical psukim. And that's like the Achat Yisrael v'achal ulmot ha'olam. One for the Jews, one for the non-Jews. Nishbal Yisrael shel yomrdu ol hamalchiyot. The Jews are obligated not to rebel against their nations. But Nishbal malchiyot shel yikshu ol Yisrael. The non-Jews have to treat Jews well. Shemakshim ol al Yisrael him gormim l'keitz lavo shel b'onato. If the non-Jewish hosts are too rough, then that's going to cause the Geulah to happen before its designated time. Reb Chelba Omer, Arba Shvot Yesh Kan. The Midrash is the same. It's two, but it's four. Why is it four? How do you get to the four from the two? Like we get three. I understand three, and now I understand two. Where'd you get four from?
Is it the first one alone, pairing the two of them, pairing the first and the third, and then the third alone?
Wow, that's that's a good. It's too complicated. Too many steps. You're actually looking at the words in the pus in those two psukim. What doubles
Yeah,
it?
it's in two
Im
phrases.
ta'iru v'im ta'oru. Im ta'iru to awaken and im ta'oru to awaken. Why those two? So the two, which is four. Reb Chelba Omer Abba Shvot Yesh Kan. Nishbir Yisrael shel yimdu al malchiyot v'shel yitchiku al kates. Jews are supposed to not rebel against their host nations and not force the redemption. And they also shouldn't reveal their mysteries to the other nations. And that they shouldn't aggressively try to conquer the land. Okay. So we know, right, this serves as a text that in early Zion, or right in the times of early Zionism, most of the Orthodox Jewish community was not supportive of the Zionist enterprise, based on what in the Gemara Ketubot is the Shalosh Shvot, those three oaths. If you turn to the last page, so this is again one of those examples that when I kind of, we have a tendency, I've in my own kind of learning and training to read. I remember learning this Gemara in Ksubos and reading it kind of quickly, and sometimes you read. You know what's coming, and so you read it for what you know is already coming. So I probably read this Gemara, a bunch of times, and know, oh yeah, this is the Gemara that actually talks about the three oaths, and so I just read it through, and it confirmed to me what I knew before, which is this is the Gemara about the three oaths. Jeffrey Rubenstein is a SAR parent and a professor of Talmud at NYU and specializes in interpreting stories of the Gemara. And he wrote a beautiful thing in explaining what's actually going on in this Gemara that changed the Gemara actually is not, there's a Gemara, so you ask anybody who's focused on the topic, they'll say, oh yeah, Shalosh Shvot, that's in the Gemara Ketubot Kuf Yud Aleph. But there's something happening in the story in Ketubot Kuf Yud Aleph that is not just reciting or retelling the fact that there are Shalosh Shvuot. And so what I want to do, see if I can, I think the main thing that I want to do is that chunk in the middle of the Rav Zera. I give a drop of introduction. The last Mishnah, Masechet Ketubot, says, Masechet Ketubot is all about, it's like funny, why the sugya about Eretz Yisrael is in Masechet Ketubot? Out of all places, like what's it doing over there? And one of the principles that Professor Uzi puts down is that when sugyot appear connected to a particular Mishnah, like are natural again in the spirit of like, I don't understand how the Gemara does stuff, so you don't pay attention to it. And he's saying like, no, you got to try and pay attention to it. It's actually there for a reason. So his argument doesn't necessarily mean like you got to try to figure out what the reason is. All right, so the Masechet Ketubot is about debates about marriage contracts between a husband and a wife, and a lot about how to draw up the marriage contract, and then a lot of things about how it gets paid out, when it's broken, and all kinds of things like that. So the last Mishnah deals with Hakol Malin Eretz Yisrael, Ve'en Hakol Motziin. So it is striking that the Mishnah about Eretz Yisrael is placed in a spot where the Mishnah is teaching you Hakol Ma'alin Eretz Yisrael, meaning anybody can force. To be ma'aleh means to force the other person to go to Eretz Yisrael. Ein hakol motziin, but not everybody can force others to leave Eretz Yisrael. Now you have to have the other mindset. You're trying to say try to dig into tell the story. What's the story that this line of the Mishnah is describing in Masechet Ketubot? So he says it's like the story is one we're very familiar with. There's a couple, and they live in New York, and one of them wants to move to Israel, and one of them's not ready to move to Israel. And they say, if you don't move, I'm leaving you. Well, and if you do move, I'm leaving you. So in context of Masechet Ketubot, who has the right to is illustrated by, do you pay the ketubah out or don't you pay the ketubah out? Now, for us, it's not right. This is like meaning it's like the litmus. It's like, okay, when the rubber meets the road about the dollars, right? Meaning, how would a court decide? One husband wants to go, one spouse wants to go, one spouse doesn't want to go. So what's this? The Mishnah paskins hakol ma'alin ve'en hakol motziin, which means if one spouse wants to go to Israel, they're allowed to force the other, and if not, you can leave, but you're breaking the contract. And if one wants to leave Israel, the one who's leaving is the one who's considered to be breaking the contract. Now, we know, the hope is you work it out together, you figure it out, and the Mishnah is not denying that you should try to work it out. But at the end of the day, these things can become a battle, and then it becomes a court battle, and the court has to decide, and the Mishnah is laying it down as that being a thing, which basically means that this Mishnah is a pretty pro-moving to Israel kind of Mishnah, right? And the Breita then says, Tanar Rabbanan Olam Yidor Adam Be'eretz Yisrael Afilu Be'ir Shruba Avdei Kochavim. Better, right? The Bible quotes all the classic Zion, not Zion is the wrong word. I'm sorry. Championing living in Eretz Yisrael kind of texts. Even if there are less Jews there, you should live in Israel, and it's better to do that than to live in a big Jewish city. There's an irony here, right? What do we learn? What text are we learning here? The Talmud Bavli, and the Talmud Bavli says, "Lo midar dam be'eretz Yisrael, afil be'ir shruba of zikochavim, v'alidar b'chutzaretz, afil be'ir shruba Yisrael. Shekal dar be'eretz Yisrael dam k'misha yesh lo ohav, kol dar b'chutzaretz dam k'misha ein lo elash." And Amar, "Zachem eretz kan ziyos zachem elokim." That's like a great thing, and the people who are willing to read that way think. Dan Bayarin is a big fan of saying the Gemara has a sense of humor, and you appreciate the Gemara much more sometimes when you think the Gemara has a sense of humor. There's an irony here. As the Talmud Bavli is saying, hey, you should live in Israel, even if it's so new, right? So the new comes next. So Rab Zeira v'kamishtavet miyed Rav Yehuda. Rab Zeira was trying to slip away from Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda was the Talmud Muvhak of Rav. Rav was the Rosh Hashiva of Sura, and Rav Yehuda opened the yeshiva in Pumbedisa, and that was an enormous yeshiva in its own right. So he's a Rosh Yeshiva, and Rab Zeira is trying to avoid him, his teacher. Why? Because he wanted to move to Israel. So why does he try to avoid Rav Yehuda when he wants to move to Israel? Dama Rav Yehuda, Kol ha'ola mibavel Eretz Yisrael over ba'aseh. If Rav Yehuda believed that if you move from Bavel to Israel, you are violating a mitzvahs aseh. Now, why would you be violating mitzvahs aseh? They're different possibilities. So think about that for a second. What's the problem? First of all, it doesn't context to the story. That's like quite a story. Zera wants to move to Israel. He wants to avoid his Rebbe because Rebbe's going to yell at him to move to Israel because he thinks you're not allowed to move to Israel then.
He's going to ask her.
He's going to ask him from doing it. Right. Yes. Why?
Is that the right line?
So he quotes a pasuk, Shene'emar, Bavela yuva'u v'shama yad yom pakti otam l'Hashem. Bavela yuva'u, this is in Yirmiyahu. So the context is Yirmiyahu is informing about the impending destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And he says, Bavela Yuval, you're going to be brought to Bavel, V'shama Yihiu, and you're going to stay there, Ad Yom Pakti Otam Lo Hashem, until I redeem you. So you're supposed to stay here. You can't leave. It's actually interesting. First of all, I mean, that's Rabbi Yehuda. But then it's actually also interesting because Rav Zera is his Talmud, and despite the fact that he's his Talmud, he's going. And he actually does go, and he tries to forget everything he learned in Chutz La'aretz. He wants to be in Israel. So he wants to be. But that's an enormous tension point. Actually, if you assume that there is that the location of the sugya is, again, this is Professor Rubin's, the location of the sugya on the Mishnah is important. The reason why the location of the sugya is on this Mishnah is exactly for that reason. This is like should I supposed to go? Do I leave my yeshiva? Or my Rebbe doesn't want me to go. So do I do that because I think it's right? Or do I listen to my Rebbe because I think it's not right? What the Gemara is actually trying to point to is, in the same way in the Mishnah, there's real dynamics here, and it's saying, like, we understand this is going to be a thing. So in the context of your life, even not in the context of the marriage, this is really going to be a thing. And actually, not only between individuals, but even like community. Like, what's the story with Bavel? What's the story of the community of Bavel? It's just kind of sitting here. So then the Gemara tries to unpack this story, and we're not going to do that now. Because all the time. So next time what I'd like to do is spend the first part of it, I'm going to try to unpack the story and kind of draw that into, and again, just keeping in mind the bigger picture, as a second example of communities that we're wrestling with, what do I make of the fact that there's a community in Israel and I'm here, and how do I interpret that? So we're going to finish that, and then we'll kind of move on to the next segment. So thanks for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.